Welcome back to part two of our discussion with psychologist and author, Dr. Dan Peters. And we're talking about his book, From Worrier to Warrior, A Guide to Conquering Your Fears. A wonderful book, not just for children, but also for adults. Dr. Dan, welcome back.
Thanks, Don.
So in your book, you describe a four-step model to use cognitive or thinking strategies. Now, I love your example of how the worry monster, like we talked about in our first part one, how it reared its head when you were about to start writing your book. Would you share how using these four steps help you to tame the worry monster?
Yeah. So here I am. One of the reasons I'm a talker, a psychologist, a speaker, was always like, this was my strength. What was not my strength? Reading, writing, anything timed, grammar, syntax, as a fellow dyslexic. And so the idea of writing a book, I never would have imagined in a million years. And all the images or the memories of the crying around the kitchen table with my mom in elementary school and just like, I can't write. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And all the stress that came with it. So I sit down to write. I get convinced by some really kind people to say, you have a lot to say. We've been to your talk and we think you should have a book. So if someone doesn't just have to go to your talk to get this information. So I say, okay, sure. And this publisher that my a colleague had put me onto said, hey, Dan, it's not a big deal. Basically, you have all these talks, you have many of them videoed. Why don't you just can get it transcribed and that can be the basis of your book. So I said, wow, that's great. I've got this like hour and a half talk on the worry monster, and this will be like the lion's share of the book. So I send it out to be transcribed and it comes back and it's 12 or 13 pages. And I'm like, 12. Oh my gosh, I have to write a book. So I sit down and of course the worry monster starts to say, you're not a good writer. You don't know what to say. Who do you think that you can actually have a book and actually write one? And I started getting peppered with all of those old thoughts. And I said to myself, wait a second, Dan, let's use some of the strategies that you usually talk about in this book and know that the worry monster is visiting. And ask yourself, what are you thinking? And so, of course, I externalized all of those thoughts that I just said and said, is that true? Is that true that just because writing was always hard for me, that I can't write a book? Is it true that I don't have anything to say about this and I know nothing about this subject? Like, no, this isn't true. This is my anxiety. This is a worry monster visiting me. So then you start to, once you identify the thinking, okay, how can I challenge it? So I started to challenge it. No, actually, I've been a psychologist for some time and I've worked in this field of anxiety for some time. And I've been given lots of feedback that the things that I teach are helpful. Okay. You also went through graduate school and you also now write a lot of blogs. And when you get your voice into the writing, instead of trying to write something that's not your voice, it actually starts to flow. Okay, I can do that. And so then that was how I started to change the thinking, replace the thoughts, and to modify it in a way that is now more adaptive and doesn't leave room for the worry monster. You know what? I have a lot to say on this topic. I know that if I use my voice and I take one page at a time, I'll get somewhere. And there you go. Take that, worry monster. Yeah.
Wonderful. I kind of relate to that worry monster when it comes to writing. It took me a long time to get to the point where I could realize that, yes, I can write. But I needed a lot of validation from others and a lot of help to kind of change that narrative in my head to, no, you can't do this, to, yes, you can do it. You just have to do it a little differently. So wonderful experience. Now, I love the and then what exercises that you mentioned in the book. Would you please share an example of how this exercise works?
Mm-hmm. So this is a great one. And this is one that for us to remember to use on yourself or with your kids or even with a spouse or a friend. So again, it's being aware of the fear. So let's say I have a fear of I am not going to get the part in the play. And it's causing me a lot of anxiety about even my tryout. And I have all these physiological sensations and I don't want to do it because the worry monster wants to make us avoid the thing we're afraid of. And so, let's use the and then what strategy. So I'm afraid I'm not going to get the part I really want. Okay. And then what? Well, I don't know what part I'll get. Okay. And then what? Well, I might get a part that I don't want. Okay. And then what? Well, then I'll have to decide if I want to do the play in the part that's offered to me or not do the play at all. Okay. And then what? And you just keep going. And eventually you realize, it's really not that big of a deal. I can deal with it. But when we keep it as that great fear and we don't, and then what it, we don't realize the worry monster tricks us into thinking we can't handle it. And that's one of the greatest strategies that the worry monster uses. And what it does is it erodes our self-confidence and our resiliency. So when we can break it down to the and then what, the vast majority of the time we realize, okay, it's not maybe my most desired outcome, but it's certainly not worth a panic attack or worth not putting my best foot forward or worth not trying. I'll just take one step at a time and see what happens and I can handle it.
Such a powerful exercise. I love that. Now, in the chapter on mindfulness interventions, you wrote that all worrisome problems live in the future. So how can staying focused on the present moment help folks let their anxious thoughts pass?
Yes, I think if there's, again, one thing to take, one strategy and one piece of information to take away from this experience that we're having on for your listeners is all of our worry and fear exists in the future. What will happen if blah, 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 blah? What will I do if? What will people think if? We talk about the worry monster uses the what ifs. They're all in the future. Because if something is happening in the present, we need to deal with it in the present. If we're in a dangerous situation, we deal with it when we're in that situation. But most of the time, the worry monster is pulling us into a future that has yet to occur. And we aren't aware, unless we become aware, that that's what's happening. So then we start to feel anxious about the outcome of the grade, the outcome of the performance, the outcome of the admission process or the tryouts. And so if we can pull ourselves into the present, we then can see, deep breath, everything's fine right now. That hasn't happened. And I always like to paraphrase the Dalai Lama when talking about this. Is the wise Dalai Lama talks about a few wise things. One is those of us who live in the past tend to be depressed because the past has already happened and there's nothing we can do about it. And those of us who live in the future tend to be anxious because the future hasn't happened yet. And he goes on to say this: if you are worried about something and there's something you can do about it, do something about it and stop worrying. If you're worried about something that there's nothing you can do about, stop worrying. There's nothing you can do about it. And I know like these are easier said than done, but it helps give us control over a situation to choose where we spend our energy and to try to ground us back into what we can control and where we are right now.
It's such a simple thing, and yet it's such a powerful concept. Now, one of the things you mentioned is the importance of acting the way you want to feel. That gives me pause. Why is that such a powerful strategy?
So, there's some of this comes from that people might be familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, AA and NA. There's a saying, you fake it to make it. And that is sort of to act in a way that you want to be, act with confidence, act with grace, act as if you believe in yourself. And we also know from research that if you don't feel happy, but you are told to smile, and you're faking it, or you're told to laugh, that changes your neural networks, your neural pathways, and your neurotransmitters, and people's mood actually elevates. So when we're stuck with the worry monster pounding on us into being afraid, if we can help our kids, ourselves, say, hey, let's do an Academy Award winning performance here. No one else will know except me and you that you're totally faking it. And you're going to pretend that you're having fun. You're going to pretend that you're not scared. I know you will be. You know you will be, because you have to give them this out. But why don't we try it and see what happens? And often it's better than we think it's going to be. And so if we can practice being the person we want to become, we actually start to become that person.
Wow. Acting the way you want to feel. That's something that I've been thinking about every day since I read the book. Now, you also mentioned resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Would you describe what resilience is and why it's so important?
Yeah, and we're all being taxed with resilience in difficult circumstances that we've all been facing for some time now. So resilience is basically the ability to bounce back, the ability to get back up, the ability to persevere in the face of difficult circumstances or obstacles. And so we think of perseverance, we think of grit is another word that's been used in more recent times. And when you think of resiliency skills, they're actually very similar to the skills we're talking about, is knowing what we're thinking, coming up with a plan, and then acting on a plan to deal with the difficult circumstance. See, the worry monster wants us just to roll over and go into fetal position. It wants us to avoid, wants us to be scared. And resilient people push ahead even in the face of adversity. And it's so key for us to, so learning about it, the worry monster, learning about skills to fight the worry monster is part of the resiliency toolkit. We also say that when resiliency meets its limits, when a person reaches its resiliency, his or her resiliency limits, is when the external circumstances overrun one's internal resources to deal with those experiences or those circumstances. That's why it's so important for people to ask for help. Sometimes resiliency, the need is to know, like, I need help. I can't do this all by myself. That's a resiliency skill. Someone just put up a roadblock. Someone just said no. Someone said, you can't do this. Okay. Another skill is to say, like, no, I'm going to find a way. Like, I'm going to figure out a way to get through this. Or, you know what? That road is blocked. I'm going to go down a different road. So resiliency, I think, when it comes to life growth and life success and life hardiness, we really want to cultivate these aspects of resiliency and pushing through and growth and belief in ourselves to solve problems.
Marvelous strategies in your book. And again, I highly recommend it, From Worrier to Warrior. Dr. Dan, thanks so much for writing this book and for sharing it with our viewers today.
Thanks, Don.
So countless millions of adults and children suffer from anxiety, and most of those are suffering in silence rather than seeking help. So having accessible, compassionate information available to people of all ages is life-changing. And this book will definitely be a help. You can see the description below for more information about Dr. Dan's work and where to buy his books. Thank you again.
Thank you.